Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably one of the most complex geopolitical domino effects in modern history, the Arab-Israeli conflicts. Now, we're not just looking at isolated events here. It's a chain reaction spanning decades, shaped by profound trauma, shifting superpower alliances, and, honestly, the raw pursuit of survival on all sides. So let's unpack exactly how one event triggered the next, shaping the Middle East we see today. Here is our roadmap for making sense of it all. We'll be going through roots and the 1948 war, the 1956 Suez Crisis, the 1967 Six-Day War, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and finally, treaties and ongoing struggles. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Roots and the 1948 War, the British Mandate and UN Partition. To really grasp the gravity of this conflict, we've got to look way back before the major wars even started. After enduring centuries of persecution, which tragically culminated in the loss of 6 million Jewish lives during the Holocaust, the push for a permanent Jewish safe haven in Palestine reached an absolute boiling point. But this timeline was actually already in motion. We're talking early Jewish settlements back in 1881. And then during World War I, you had the British making conflicting promises to both Arab leaders and Jewish communities. Fast forward to 1947, a heavily strained British administration basically hands the whole problem over to the UN. And the UN's fix? Resolution 181. The idea was to just divide the land into separate Jewish and Arab states. But while the Jewish community accepted this two-state solution, Arab nations completely rejected it. And the sheer depth of that rejection was captured pretty chillingly by Azam Pasha, the leader of the Arab League. His words made it incredibly clear. The struggle for the region would inevitably end in war. Diplomacy had basically hit a wall. A violent collision was now sadly unavoidable. So localized violence erupts almost instantly. We're talking brutal massacres like Deir Yassin that killed over 100 Palestinians, and retaliatory strikes that took 78 Jewish lives. Utterly exhausted, the British abruptly withdraw on May 14, 1948. And on that exact same day, Israel boldly declares itself an independent country. But there was absolutely no time to celebrate, because almost overnight, forces from Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon invaded. So despite getting official recognition from global heavyweights like the US and the Soviet Union, this newly formed state had to instantly fight for its very survival. When the armistice agreements were finally signed in 1949, the outcome was incredibly polarized. Israel had not only survived what they called their War of Independence, but they actually expanded their territory by 37% beyond the original UN plan. But the human toll? It was a massive catastrophe on both sides. Around 700,000 Palestinians were displaced into refugee camps, denied the right to return home. And right around the same time, anywhere from 700,000 to 900,000 Jews were expelled from surrounding Arab countries. The demographic landscape of the Middle East was permanently and tragically redrawn. Which brings us to Section 2, the 1956 Suez Crisis. A canal sparks global conflict. So, moving into the 1950s, those unresolved political tensions flare up again, but this time with a bit of a twist. Now, you might be wondering, why would a single canal spark a massive global conflict involving Britain, France, and Israel? Well, it all came down to two things: trade and oil. The Suez Canal was this absolutely vital artery connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and it was responsible for transporting 2/3 of Europe's oil. In 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser boldly nationalizes that canal, essentially stripping control right out of the hands of Britain and France. At the exact same time, Egypt blocks the Straits of Tiran, which cuts off Israel's crucial access to the Red Sea. In response to all of this, a secret alliance is formed. Israel, Britain, and France launch a coordinated, completely surprise attack on Egypt. But they made one massive miscalculation. They kept the United States completely in the dark. A furious President Eisenhower steps in and threatens massive economic sanctions, literally forcing all three attackers to retreat. Egypt ends up claiming a huge political victory, while Israel learned a pretty harsh lesson about the limits of Allied support, though they did manage to secure their shipping rights through the strait. Next up, Section 3, the 1967 Six-Day War, shifting alliances and preemptive strikes. All right, welcome to the 1960s. Cold War dynamics between the US and the Soviet Union are really starting to hijack the Middle East, and tensions absolutely exploded, thanks in part to an unbelievable piece of misinformation. Get this, on May 13, 1967, the Soviet KGB deliberately fed Egypt false intelligence, claiming Israel was gearing up for a full-scale invasion of Syria. Acting on this lie, Egypt mobilizes, demands UN peacekeepers leave, blocks Israeli shipping again, and partners up with Jordan. Feeling the walls literally closing in and heavily outnumbered, Israel forms a national unity government. Deciding their only chance at survival was to strike first, they launch Operation Focus on June 5. And the entire momentum of this conflict shifted based on one staggering number: 300. In just 3 hours on the morning of June 5th, Israel's surprise airstrike wiped out over 300 Egyptian aircraft right there on the tarmac. In a single, devastating stroke, Egypt lost 90% of its air power, giving Israel immediate and absolute air dominance. With undeniable control of the skies, the Israeli military advanced at lightning speed on the ground. Over just 6 days, fighting on 3 different fronts against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, the geopolitical map was entirely redrawn. Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the heavily fortified Golan Heights. By the time the ceasefire hit on June 10, this small nation had astonishingly tripled its territory, cementing its status as the supreme military power in the region. But as we see time and time again, military victory didn't equate to peace. The fallout revealed a profound and devastating disparity. Roughly 20,000 Arab soldiers were killed, compared to just 800 Israelis. This humiliating defeat pushed Arab leaders to gather in Sudan in August of '67, and the result was the famous Khartoum Resolution, which delivered the staunch 3 no's: no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, and no negotiation with Israel. Diplomatic progress was utterly, absolutely frozen. That brings us to Section 4, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the surprise attack. That deep diplomatic freeze we just talked about, it set the stage for our next domino. Egypt, now led by Anwar Sadat, was facing severe economic crises and desperately needed the Sinai Peninsula back. When diplomacy failed, Sadat turned back to military action, resulting in a massive shock to the system. On October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a highly coordinated, huge surprise attack, and they strategically chose Yom Kippur, literally the holiest day of fasting and prayer in the Jewish calendar, catching the Israeli military entirely off guard. The initial hours were a huge success for Arab forces, with Egypt crossing the Suez and Syria advancing right into the Golan Heights. But the momentum violently swung back. Within 24 hours, Israel mobilizes its reserves and launches fierce counterattacks. They push Syria back 35 kilometers and cross the Suez themselves, pushing dangerously close to Egypt's capital, Cairo. The fighting got so aggressive and the threat of global escalation so high that the UN, heavily pressured by the US and the Soviet Union, had to step in and force a ceasefire. Finally, Section 5, Treaties and Ongoing Struggles, the Camp David Accords and beyond. So, while Israel was militarily victorious in '73, the initial shock of that surprise attack proved one crucial thing: military dominance alone wasn't a permanent solution. This realization is what finally cracked the diplomatic freeze. Through rigorous U.S. mediation, historic peace talks actually begin. This leads to the 1978 Camp David Accords, and in 1979, Egypt becomes the very first Arab state to sign a formal peace treaty with Israel, securing the return of the Sinai Peninsula. But this peace came at a brutal cost. In 1981, President Anwar Sadat was assassinated by extremists who opposed the treaty. Decades of incredibly complex moves followed, including peace agreements with other Arab nations and Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Which leaves us with the profound, unresolved realities of today. Israel has firmly established itself as an economic and military regional superpower, yet it still holds disputed territories like the Golan Heights and the West Bank. Meanwhile, the Palestinian people continue their long, arduous struggle for an independent state. As we've seen by tracing this intricate domino effect, every single military victory and peace treaty has brought a whole new set of complications. So the critical question we have to leave you with today is this: will this deeply entrenched historical cycle of conflict ever find a true, lasting conclusion? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep learning.